Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. NATO has launched Arctic Sentry, officially designed to counter threats from Russia and China in the far north. The mission could diffuse tensions within the alliance over Donald Trump's desire to acquire Greenland. More on that later in the program, but before we dive in, tonight's headlines. The European Parliament approves 90 billion euros in EU funding for Kyiv as Russia kills 9 civilians across Ukraine. As the U.S. aims for strategic partnership with the South Caucasus, Russia is losing its grip on the region. And Hungarian opposition leader Péter Magyar warns of a smear campaign against him as the country gears up for a general election. NATO on Wednesday officially launched its Arctic Sentry mission, a multi-domain activity aimed at enhancing the alliance's presence in one of the most strategically significant and environmentally challenging areas, the far north. The European-led defensive mission comes following conversations between Mark Rutte and President Donald Trump in Davos earlier this year. Our defense correspondent Zuzanna Jurek is in Brussels and brings us up to speed on the latest.
The defence and deterrence of the High North is becoming a key priority for the NATO alliance, as has been underlined by the initiation of the Arctic Sentry earlier today. Now, we know that this mission, this policing mission, will mirror similar initiatives taken by the NATO alliance over the course of the last year, whether it be the Baltic or the Eastern Sentry. But unlike those initiatives which have been taken directly in response to Russian threats, whether it be the violations of Polish airspace by Russian drones, or whether it be the cutting of telecommunication cables at the bottom of the Baltic Sea, this mission is seen as a preventative measure against the growing concern over environmental changes and climate change, which is seen as motivating the opening of new trade routes, as well as the growing interest of Russia and China in the region. Now, we also know that this mission will be primarily European-led, with Brits, the French and Danes contributing majority of the capabilities and armed forces. But also, importantly, as has been underlined by the Secretary-General of the NATO alliance, Mark Rutte, during his press briefing earlier today, the newest NATO member states, that is Sweden and Finland, both of which are Nordic countries, are expected to make significant contribution based on their experience in fighting in these challenging environments.
The Arctic and the High North are increasingly important for our collective security. NATO and allies have been sharpening our focus on the region. We regularly conduct exercises in the Arctic, ensuring that we are ready to fight and operate in all conditions. Finland and Sweden's membership greatly enhances NATO's posture in the region and our Arctic capabilities.
Now, this primarily European-led policing mission comes at the back of the head of the military committee of the NATO alliance, Admiral Cavo-Dragoni, announcing the restructuring of the key command posts within the alliance, with Europeans taking charge of majority of them, as has been underlined by the head of the General Command of the Polish Armed Forces, General Wiesław Kukuła. Both the Polish and the German commanders are expected to achieve a historic first with this restructuring.
For the first time in history, an officer of the Polish Armed Forces, a 4-star general, will take command of a NATO joint headquarters, JFC Brunssum. It's a significant sign of trust in the Polish Armed Forces and our defense efforts.
Now, this reorientation towards a more European-led NATO alliance comes after months of pressures from the Trump administration for Europeans to take greater charge of their own defences. Inadvertently, this will be a topic during tomorrow's ministerial meeting here at the NATO HQ in Brussels, particularly as the US Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, will be absent for the second time in a row instead of sending his deputy. From Brussels for TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
Another day brings more death and destruction to Ukraine as Russia continues its attacks on 2 primary targets, the civilian population and the energy grid. But while Russia's assault continues, its losses are also piling up, with Ukraine targeting its sanctioned refineries and SpaceX cutting off access to Starlink. More updates from Ukraine in Anastasia Yanchenko's report.
Another tough 24 hours for Ukraine. At least 9 people, including 3 toddlers, were killed and 39 others were injured. Overall, Russia launched more than 120 drones, striking multiple regions. The attacks were mostly aimed at destroying Ukraine's already fragile energy grid, leaving workers with no chance to restore damaged facilities.
I just want to cry. nothing else, especially since some of the equipment had already been repaired and put back into operation, and the work that had been done is now being redone.
These attacks come amid the US administration's continued belief that peace in Ukraine is as close as it has ever been. But Ukrainian war analysts say they see no positive signals that point toward peace.
All these American expectations are very, very high. The Russian Federation is stalling. They understand that time is on their side. They are counting on Ukraine becoming exhausted.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov also rejected US optimism.
Negotiations are continuing. There is still a very long way to go.
Tuesday night was not calm in Russia's Volgograd region either, as Ukrainian drones struck the US-sanctioned Lukoil refinery, part of Ukraine's broader campaign against Russia's military machine, which experts say proved effective in 2025.
Ukraine has carried out around 120 strikes on various targets linked to the oil industry. These actions have inflicted economic damage on the Russian Federation, totaling 10.3 billion euros.
Despite reports of heavy human and financial losses, Russia is facing a major new challenge, as its military units have lost access to Starlink, with tens of thousands of terminals affected.
This is exactly why on many fronts the enemy's assaults have literally come to a halt. In other words, they have stopped attacking, and in some areas they abandoned more complex and large-scale offensive operations. All of this is due to communication issues.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy stresses that the Russian army isn't preparing to stop.
And the only thing that really works to protect life is our strength, which means support and strengthening of Ukraine must continue. Air defense for our state, packages to strengthen our resilience.
And support is coming, as on Wednesday the European Parliament finally greenlit a €90 billion loan for Ukraine, approved by the European Council in December, after it had failed to agree on using frozen Russian assets. The funds will secure a large chunk of the country's budgetary and military needs for the next 2 years. Anastasia Yanchenko, TVP World.
And as Ukraine strives to end the war, the Financial Times reported that President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is planning to uphold democracy and a deadline set by Washington by announcing a presidential election and a referendum. But the news has since been debunked by President Zelenskyy himself. Oz Karaji joins me now from Kyiv with more. Good evening, Oz. So does this mean an election is completely off the table for now?
Well, President Zelenskyy announced this, addressed this rather, in response to this Financial Times article. So to set the scene, on Wednesday morning, the Financial Times reported that President Zelenskyy, on the 24th of February, that will be the 4th anniversary of the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, that he was going to announce there would be presidential elections and a referendum held on the question of a potential peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. Now, as soon as that article came out, we heard denials from the president's office, and later on Wednesday, President Zelenskyy, responding to this, denied these reports, saying it was the first that he'd heard of them, and stressed that any elections, for elections to be held, this has been Kyiv's long-standing position on this, that for elections to be held, there would need to be a ceasefire. There's been no indication that a ceasefire is coming close, and any mention of a potential deal would need to be put to the Ukrainian people in a referendum if it included major concessions that went against Ukraine's constitution. So these are issues that have still not been addressed, and without them being addressed, there's no likelihood of there being a poll on either the presidential election or this referendum. Now, President Zelenskyy did also mention the fact that he acknowledged and confirmed the fact that the US has been putting pressure on Ukraine to hold elections. That's no secret. President Trump has made that clear in previous statements. However, he did say that the US was not linking holding those elections to security guarantees. So again, another denial from Zelenskyy on the specific details published in that Financial Times article. That's not to say that Kyiv doesn't want to hold these sorts of polls, these elections, but under the current conditions, under under martial law, they are simply not possible unless there is some kind of ceasefire arranged for that to happen. And without that on the cards, we're unlikely to see any kind of poll in Ukraine anytime soon.
Thank you so much, Oz, for providing us with more details on the situation. That was Oz Kataji reporting live from Kyiv. Russia has no intention of falling behind the U.S. when it comes to its relationships with the Southern Caucasus nations. After the U.S. struck a strategic partnership with Azerbaijan and a nuclear deal with Armenia, the balance of power in terms of global alliances is shifting. Could Russia be losing its grip on its southern neighbors as the U.S. and the EU bring them closer into their orbit? John Todd went looking for an answer to this question in this next piece.
US Vice President J.D. Vance is welcomed in Azerbaijan's capital Baku, where he and President Ilham Aliyev signed a deal covering economic and security cooperation as Washington seeks to expand its influence in a region where Moscow was once the main power broker.
For us, it's a great honor to be a strategic partner to the most powerful country of the world, United States of America.
It comes after Vance was welcomed on Monday in Armenia's capital, Yerevan. His tour is aimed at pushing the Washington-brokered Trump route for international peace and prosperity, addressing a decades-old conflict between the two countries. The deal could transform energy and trade routes in the strategic South Caucasus region.
President of the United States.
This is a massive regional integration project, which with it brings the potential for tens of billions of US dollars in foreign direct investment.
What we're seeing is American engagement taking advantage of a vacuum of power. More specifically, it's Russia and Russia's distraction, overwhelmed with its failed invasion of Ukraine, that has created an emerging vacuum.
That as German Foreign Minister Johann Vadeful hosted 5 counterparts from Central Asia, all members of the Russian-led Commonwealth of Independent States. He told the foreign ministers they must do more to follow sanctions against Russia. In a near knee-jerk reaction, the Kremlin stated on Thursday that Moscow would further develop mutually beneficial relations with Baku and Yerevan.
It's a sign of desperation. It's rooted more in weakness and less about confidence. However, Russian leverage should not be underestimated.
Analysts say while the West's approach is based on seduction and attraction, Russia relies on coercion and pressure. The choice Central Asia and the South Caucasus make will have lasting impacts. John Todd for TVP World.
Temperatures in Hungary are rising as the country's parliamentary elections draw nearer. Opposition leader Peter Magyar has claimed that Viktor Orban's government may be preparing to release a doctored sex tape meant to discredit his political opponent. All that as TISA leads in the polls ahead of Orban's Fidesz. Our correspondent Andrew Sweeney has more on the campaign in Hungary.
It's 60 days until the Hungarian general election on April 12th, and 2 years since Peter Magyar announced he'd left the governing Fidesz party in a dramatic interview.
2 years ago, I stood in front of the studio of Hungary's top political YouTube channel, Partizan. I wanted to turn back, but after looking at the photo of my 3 children on my phone, I started walking up the stairs. I would not let my sons grow up in a captured country under the rule of a family mafia.
Since then, Magyar's TISA party has emerged as a serious challenge for Prime Minister Viktor Orban. The government has been assailed by public anger over a faltering economy and systemic abuse in children's homes. Now an alleged cover-up of carcinogenic leaks at the Samsung battery factory is adding to that fury.
This is a major scandal, to be honest, especially because we know that the problem has been identified and it has been known to decision makers for years.
Magyar has also accused the government of resorting to doctoring a sex tape, which he says could be released imminently.
Many journalists received a link showing a room under surveillance with cameras. I suspect they are planning to release a recording, possibly made with Secret Service equipment and perhaps even fabricated, that shows me in an intimate moment with my then girlfriend.
It's not new. They already released recordings with Peter Magyar multiple times. They use Secret Service tools on civil society.
Prime Minister Orban has not commented on Magyar's allegations. He's focusing his campaign on portraying Brussels and Ukraine as enemies of Hungary.
They, Brussels, have decided that Ukraine will be admitted to the Union as early as 2027. This new plan is an open declaration of war against Hungary. This April, at the ballot box, Hungarians must stop them. Fidesz is the only force standing between Hungary and Brazilian rule.
Magyar, however, remains defiant. He says the threat to Hungary from abroad comes from mafia networks linked to Orban.
Dear frightened Fidesz supporters, go ahead, release everything you have, fabricate whatever you like. I will not yield to blackmail or threats.
Magyar is expected to make a major campaign speech in Budapest on February 15th. The election campaign officially kicks off next week. For TVP World, Andrew Sweeney.
The fallout from the release of the Epstein files is causing a stir in Britain. Keir Starmer's government is in the line of fire in what could be one of the greatest governmental crises in decades. And as the question of Starmer's possible resignation hangs in the air, the royal family is also under major scrutiny due to Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's close connections to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. More on the latest revelations on how those revelations are playing out in the UK in Aisha Baj's report.
The political aftershocks from the latest Epstein file release are now rattling Downing Street, and this friendship might bring about the imminent downfall of the UK's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, he lied repeatedly to my team when asked about his relationship with Epstein before and during his tenure as ambassador.
This is Lord Peter Mandelson, Britain's former ambassador to Washington, who resigned last week after documents revealed extensive past ties to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
He was a high-ranking minister. He'd been an EU commissioner. And again, the question is, we only know this almost because of the Epstein documents. So what else was he leaking when he was EU commissioner?
It was the Prime Minister's decision to bring Mandelson back into government despite earlier warnings about reputational risk. And despite the pressure from within his own Labour Party,
the distraction needs to end and the leadership in Downing Street has to change.
The man from Downing Street insists he's staying put.
I will never walk away from the mandate I was given to change this country.
But adversaries are circling.
Starmer goes, maybe what the public really deserve is a general election, and that is what we'll push for.
But tremors reach far beyond the UK.
I just ask a question, is your money dirty money?
No, it's not. So, in fact...
Why is it not dirty money?
Because I earned it.
Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex offender who died in 2019 while awaiting trial for trafficking minors, was worth nearly $600 million at his death. He had major international ties, including to Central Europe.
Information has emerged concerning individuals who, for example, informed Mr. Epstein in Krakow that they already had a group of Polish women or girls.
In Warsaw, the Polish government has formed a special task force to examine whether any Polish nationals were involved in a way that warrants investigation.
It's a horrific affair involving a paedophile that could have security implications for the Polish state if there is a Russian involvement in particular.
The Polish task force will examine whether Russian intelligence services may have played a role in parts of the Epstein operation, which the Russian side still denies.
Because this girl deserves the truth.
With 3 million more documents still to be released, the Epstein files could trigger further resignations. For TVP World, I'm Aisha Bajra.
And now more news from Poland. The country is set to become a major gas hub for Central Europe, with 2 terminals established to receive fuel by sea, with one currently operating and another under construction. In the near future, the country will be able to cover its own needs while also sending its surplus fuel abroad. Jakub Kapiszewski has this report.
6 million tonnes, or 30% more than 2024. That's how much natural gas Poland received last year by sea in a super-cooled form, also known as LNG. The terminal accepting those shipments, located in the western port of Świnoujście, just underwent a major expansion before being utilised to its max capabilities by Orlen, the company that imports natural gas to Poland.
Last year was exceptional for the LNG segment of our company. We set a new shipment record to the Świnoujście terminal.
Orlen received 81 shipments last year, 20 more than the year before. This means that on average, a gas carrier is moored in Świnoujście every 4 or 5 days. Most of the fuel arrived from the United States, with 17 shipments coming from Qatar. Some of this LNG was directed towards Ukraine, with Orlen shipping around 0.5 million tons to the country. Still, Poland would like to export even more.
Poland has all the resources needed to become a gas trader, to become an intermediate in gas trade all over the Central and Eastern Europe.
That's why Gaz-System, the operator of the LNG terminal in Świnoujście, is building a second facility, this time a floating one, and is even mulling over the possibility of a third. The facility will nearly double Poland's LNG import capability, bringing it from 8 to 14 billion cubic meters annually. In theory, Poland could then supply Slovakia and Hungary, both landlocked countries. But governments in Bratislava and Budapest are hung up on Russian gas. But with Europe's ban on the fuel going into effect November 2027, their position may change, and Gas Hub Poland stands to benefit.
And now it's time to revisit one of the major topics of today's service, the announcement of the Arctic Sentry and what it will entail. It is my pleasure to welcome on the program Martin Sklenar, former Slovakian defense minister and security expert. Thank you so much for joining me on the program. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much for having me.
So let's begin with the Arctic Sentry, the Allied Command Operations, which I will later refer to as the ACO, which is responsible for the planning and execution of all the NATO, be it exercises, activities and operations, began the Arctic Sentry today. These exercises, how dire was the need to conduct them now?
Obviously, it was very high, the need for making sure that NATO has a coherent strategy and action in the Arctic. This is what the Arctic Sentry is about. We have heard critics that NATO is just repackaging things that it would do anyway, just to make sure that the relationship between Europe and the Trump administration is mitigated, and there are no further fallouts. But what this means actually is organizing NATO's possibilities and action into one coherent operation, so to say, the Sentry type of operation that NATO has launched both on the eastern flank and in the Baltic Sea, just representing the attention and the focus that now NATO as an organization, and with that all the countries that are members of NATO, focus on Arctic, on Greenland, and on the wider High North territory, which is critical for collective defense, especially for European, but also for American, for the United States. That area of the world is very important for making sure that the U.S. is secure against the threats coming from Russia and the provocations from China.
Over the past few weeks and months, we've seen a lot of tensions between the United States and Europe when it comes to Greenland, the very question of Greenland. The Arctic Sentry, do you think that this is what was discussed and agreed between Donald Trump and Mark Rutte in Davos? Is this a response, or perhaps this sentry was actually in the cards before that conversation took place?
That is difficult to say, frankly, and maybe might also be, a question of what came first. But in the end, the important thing is that it's happening now, and NATO declares that this is a properly focused area, or the operations that NATO conducts are now properly focused not only on the eastern flank and the Baltic Sea and the Mediterranean, but also on the Arctic. Which is fully in line with what NATO can do, and probably is what Mark Rutte discussed with President Trump in Davos. Whether it was in the initialization phase at that point, or whether it was already already planned. I wouldn't, read too much into that. The important thing is that they discussed it before. They found an agreement on it, and now NATO is starting to deliver. And the thing that it needs to be said is the current scale of operations is not the final stage of the Arctic Sentry, right? There will be more exercises, there will be more attention, there will be more planning done to make sure that NATO is able to react to anything that might happen in that part of the world.
So how much do you think the Arctic Sentry is actually changing the NATO strategy when it comes to the far north?
As I said, I mean the importance of the region for allied security and collective defense has been recognized for a long time. What the Sentry brings right now is dedicated attention, and it becomes one of the tasks of the command post in Norfolk, very officially, which will mean that the resources will be formally dedicated to this kind of world, to this area, to this domain, to the Arctic, and well, in terms of that, there certainly will be a push, a pressure to do as much as possible with the resources that are available to the NATO staff, coming from national armies, to be present in the Arctic, to show force, to show the commitment, and to showcase the capabilities that are ready and available should there be a need in the Arctic.
There's definitely a lot of things and a lot of conversations being had around the Arctic Sentry. Do you think that the Sentry, the NATO ministerial, which is set to take place, do you think that these steps is actually what is going to stop Russia and China and is going to deter them from actually expanding their sphere of influence in the Arctic?
Well, that's certainly something that we have to see what will be the reaction. But first of all, the Arctic Sentry, the attention that NATO is paying to the Arctic, comes from already the provocative actions and some of the increased presence that Russia and China are presenting in the Arctic. So in a sense, it's a reaction already. That's what NATO does. It's a defensive alliance. It reacts to possible threats. That's what it does also in the Arctic. Very frankly, if Russia reacts to this in any way, I think that's something that I would actually like to see, because then it means that NATO is doing good in terms of making sure that not only Arctic is well protected and defended, but also that the situation that had the potential to bring a split into the transatlantic alliance has been mitigated, and Russia and China will not like it, and they will try to push against that effort that NATO has just started to do.
I would like us to change a point of focus for a moment. For the first time in history, a 4-star Polish general is set to command the NATO Allied Joint Force Command in Brunsum, Netherlands, breaking what is a 2-decade-long tenure by German and Italian officers. What does this change signal, especially for the eastern flank of NATO?
It signals the rising importance of Poland quite clearly in the NATO planning, in NATO capability development, and the role that the Polish armed forces are playing in the system of the collective defense, and also represents a little bit the shift that is going on in the attention from mostly Western Europe centered organization, and especially the military command, to bringing in more Eastern European voices, representatives, and brains, and officers to lead this important post. It's certainly something that not only the U.S. but also Western allies have called for a longer time. So I would see this as a very positive development, and something that can bring in the Eastern European perspective directly into operational level of the NATO command structure.
Just before we go, a quick question. You oversee a project which is meant to focus on battle readiness for Central and Eastern Europe. Do you think that these countries that are involved, in case of an open attack, would have what it takes to be able to defend themselves?
what we're trying to see is measure exactly that. What is the transformation of the inputs of the increased defense spending and the commitments that we see into the readiness, into the real readiness. And what we see is that there is a rising trend in capabilities, in military capabilities, like in air and missile defense, or the new projects of countering drones. What we would like to see more also is the interconnectedness between the countries on the eastern frontier or the eastern flank of NATO, be it in the spirit of integrated air and missile defense, or making sure that the military mobility is brought to a new level of interconnectedness, not only with new roads and bridges, but also permits and border crossings that need to be minimized to a minimum time, just to make sure that the readiness is actually there, that the military can act if it's needed.
Minister, thank you so much for joining me on the program. Martin Sklenar, former Slovakian defense minister and security expert, was my guest on the program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you back here on TVP World for more.